Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating question. Is the United States, a country that's, less than 250 years old, actually mentioned in prophecies written thousands of years ago? We're going to explore a pretty wild interpretation that says yes, absolutely. It claims America is hidden in plain sight. We're going to follow the clues connecting global politics, national symbols, and yep, even the dollar bill to ancient scripture.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The big question the source material we're looking at tries to answer is this. If the Bible has prophecies about the major world powers, where on earth does a giant, influential nation like the United States fit in? It's a mystery, a puzzle, and the author we're following tries to solve it by linking ancient texts to things we see every day. So the first clue in this whole thing doesn't start with some big, flashy vision of the future. Nope, it goes way, way back to a promise made thousands of years ago in the book of Genesis. The entire argument really hinges on this idea that the descendants of Abraham were given a very specific, very tangible blessing.
And this is it. This one verse you're looking at right now is the absolute cornerstone of this first argument. It's a promise that Abraham's descendants would control the gates of their enemies. Now, according to the source, the key to unlocking this whole prophecy for our modern world comes down to one simple question. What exactly are these gates today?
Right. So how do we get from ancient city walls to the 21st century? Well, the source reinterprets gates for a modern, globalized world. The argument is that today, the most important gates aren't the entrances to a city. They're the strategic bottlenecks, the canals, the straits that control the flow of almost everything that's bought and sold on the planet. They are, quite literally, the gates of the global economy.
And this is where the theory gets super specific. The author points directly at the United States and Great Britain. The argument is that these two nations, through their military and political power, have controlled these exact commercial gates. We're talking about Gibraltar, which is the gateway to the Mediterranean, the Suez and Panama canals that literally connect oceans, and even strategic spots right next to Russia and China. The claim is that this control is so total that it basically makes them the gatekeepers of world trade.
And that brings us to the first huge conclusion in this interpretation. The author says, look, if the US and Britain are the only nations that have fulfilled this ancient prophecy of controlling the world's commercial gates, then they must be the modern-day descendants of the biblical tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh who are the heirs to this specific blessing. So that's the first big piece of this prophetic puzzle locked into place.
All right, let's move on to our second clue. And this one shifts from massive global strategy to something you might have in your wallet right now. The argument moves from geopolitics to the symbols printed on the US $1 bill, and it suggests there's a hidden link to one of the most sacred objects in the entire Old Testament.
So, to understand this clue, we have to go to the book of Joshua. The ancient Israelites are finally about to enter the Promised Land, but there's a big problem. The Jordan River is flooding and totally impassable. So, God tells them that the Ark of the Covenant, which represented God's actual presence with them, would go first and part the waters. Now, according to the source, this incredible historical moment is also a prophetic blueprint.
Okay, now here's a super critical detail for this argument. The Ark was so holy it could never be seen by ordinary people. The book of Numbers gives these very specific instructions for how to cover it up before it was moved. First, you drape the thick temple veil over it. Then, on top of that, you put a layer of tough animal skins. And finally, you spread a cloth of pure blue over the whole thing. And this is where the visual interpretation really kicks in. The source argues that when you draped that thick, heavy veil over the ark, it would naturally bunch up between the two golden angels, the cherubim, on the lid. And what shape would that make? A pyramid. Then, the next layer, those coarse animal skins, would give the whole thing the color and texture of stone, at least when you looked at it from a distance. And here's the final step. The source suggests that the blue cloth laid on the very top created this distinct separation. Above the ark, there was said to be this cloud of glory, which was a visible sign of God's presence. So the claim is, you put it all together, this blue cloth separating the stone-like pyramid from the divine cloud above it, and from afar, what would it look like? An all-seeing eye floating above a pyramid.
And there you have it, the direct conclusion from the source. This crazy visual parallel between the biblical description of the covered Ark of the Covenant and the Great Seal of the United States on the back of the dollar bill is presented as the second major piece of evidence. The claim, really, is that America's most famous symbol is actually a picture of Israel's most sacred object on the move.
But wait, the symbolic analysis goes even deeper. into language. The source looks at the date written at the bottom of the pyramid, MDCCXXVI, right? 1776. Now, the author makes this really interesting phonetic claim, that if you pronounce those Roman numerals in a certain Latin way, MDCCLXXVI, the sounds are almost identical to a specific phrase in Hebrew. And when you translate that Hebrew phrase, it's interpreted to mean, Mother, know how God is my covering, refuge. The argument is that there's a hidden message right in the founding date, confirming America as a divine refuge.
All right, our third and final clue takes us into a different world, the world of what you might call prophetic arithmetic. The argument goes back to that same story of crossing the Jordan River, but this time it's not about what things look like. It's about the numbers. So the logic here is that the key parts of the story, the people involved, the objects they used, the things they did, they aren't just random historical details. The source argues they're actually symbolic numbers, and when you add them up in a very specific way, they reveal the final structure of the United States.
So let's actually walk through how the source breaks down this math. The argument goes like this. The ark, carried by priests from 13 different family lines, well, that's said to symbolize the 13 original colonies. Then you have Joshua, the one leader representing Great Britain, or maybe later, the single capital DC. Then we get 3 different groups of 12 stones taken from the river symbolize the states that came from territory ceded by Britain, 12 men, one from each tribe, represent the European immigrants, and 12 stones set up at the camp symbolize the states carved out of the Louisiana Purchase. And when you add all of that up, 13 plus 1 plus those 3 groups of 12, you get 50. Exactly 50. The source presents this number not as some kind of weird coincidence, but as a prophetic blueprint that was hidden in this ancient story all along, perfectly predicting the final number of states in the United States of America. So we've looked at global trade routes, the dollar bill, and some pretty specific math. What does it all mean? What's the big takeaway? Well, the source brings these 3 clues together to form one single thesis about what America's role and purpose is supposed to be.
The source wraps it all up with this really powerful statement. The argument is that America's true identity isn't just as another country, but as a divinely created sanctuary. Those stones from the Jordan River story are seen as the people, all the people, who have come to the U.S. looking for safety and protection under God, which was symbolized by the ark.
So when you boil it all down, the core idea of this entire interpretation is that the United States wasn't just a series of historical accidents. Instead, its destiny, right down to its symbols and its number of states, was foretold thousands of years ago. In this view, America's ultimate purpose is to be that field of refuge, a divinely prepared sanctuary for people in a chaotic world.
And that brings us to the end of our journey through this really unique interpretation. It's obviously a very detailed and complex way of reading scripture and history, and it leaves us with a much bigger question to think about. Whether you accept this particular argument or not, it makes you wonder, how do these powerful foundational stories, whether they're ancient myths or modern ideals, shape how a country sees itself and its purpose in the world? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.